Hi everyone, welcome to our first ACT and grammar video. The first lesson that we're going to be dealing with today is all about clauses. Now it's really important for us to come to a really complete understanding of clauses so we can do well in the ACT and so we can improve our own writing. So what are clauses all about? Well, there's basically two types of clauses that we're going to be talking about. We've got independent clauses and dependent clauses. Okay? These are the building blocks of all sentences. So to create any kind of sentence, whether it's a simple sentence or a really sophisticated sentence, we need to have a really firm understanding of how these clauses work and how they help us make all different kinds of sentences. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about our two different kinds of clauses. Like I said, we've got independent clauses and dependent clauses. So let's start with independent clauses. We'll move the screen down a little bit here. Okay. So independent clauses. Important thing to understand about independent clauses. They can be, right? This is the important word here. They can be their own sentences. They can stand on their own as a sentence. They have a subject, they have a verb, and they express a complete thought. So an independent clause can be its own sentence. Okay? And if you're, it's easy for you to remember an independent clause. What does it do? It can stand on its own, right? Just think about an independent person, right? An independent person can stand on their own, right? They don't need someone taking care of them. They don't need someone paying their bills, right? They do that on their own. They're independent, right? Someone who lives on their own, does their own laundry, pays their own bills, pays their own rent, is independent, right? That's an independent person. Same thing with clauses, right? A clause that can stand on its own, that can be its own sentence, is independent. So let's take a look at some examples, right? I took these examples from, a summary from your journal responses on young Goodman Brown, right? Goodman Brown lost faith in his wife, right? We've got a subject, we've got a verb, it's a complete thought. So that's an independent clause, right? This can be its own sentence. Subject, verb, complete thought, that's an independent clause, right? Let's look at the next one. Brown went into the forest late at night. Again, subject, verb, complete thought, right? So that's an independent clause. It could be its own sentence. How about the next one? The townspeople live double lives, right? Again, a complete thought. We've got a subject, we've got a verb. It can stand on its own. So these are all really good examples of independent clauses, okay? So that brings us to the second kind of clause that we're going to be dealing with, dependent clauses, all right? So let's scroll down a little bit here. Let's clear this away. Okay? Dependent clauses are the exact opposite, right? They can't, right? And let's highlight this. They cannot be their own sentence. They can't stand on their own. So again, think about, an independent person versus a dependent person. A dependent person, say someone who lives at home with their mother and father, their mother does their laundry and cooks for them and cleans for them, right? They are dependent on their parents, right? They can't stand on their own, okay? So dependent clause. So what does that mean? So if it can't be its own sentence, why would we use it? Well, dependent clauses need an independent clause to make a complete sentence, right? Dependent clauses can't stand on their own. They depend on an independent clause to make it a sentence. Make sense? Right? So let's look at some examples, right? Since Goodman Brown lost faith in his wife, right? If I just came in and said that to you, since Goodman Brown lost faith in his wife, you'd expect me to say more, right? Well, what happened because Goodman Brown lost faith in his wife? It's not a complete thought, right? This is a dependent clause. The since makes it a dependent clause. It's not a complete thought. It's got a subject, it's got a verb, but it's not a complete thought, right? And the since makes it incomplete, right? This one makes it a dependent clause. Same thing here with the next one. After Brown went into the forest late at night. If I just wrote that in my paper, if I said, after Brown went into the forest late at night, you'd expect me to continue that thought, right? Well, what happened after Brown went to the forest late at night, right? Let's look at the next one. As the townspeople lived double lives. Again, it's an incomplete thought. It's a dependent clause. It can't be its own sentence. It can't stand on its own, right? Because if I wrote this in my paper, as the townspeople lived double lives, you'd expect me to finish that thought. Well, you would say, well, what was happening as the townspeople were living double lives, right? So again, to reiterate, dependent clauses, they've got a subject, they've got a verb, but because of these subordinating conjunctions, they're not complete thoughts. So they can't be their own sentences. So we've got independent clauses, which can stand on their own, and we've got dependent clauses, which can't stand on their own, okay? And so the reason why dependent clauses can't stand on their own is because of these subordinating conjunctions. And there's a bunch of words, right? If we took this out, if we took out since, this would be a good sentence, right? Goodman Brown lost faith in his wife. That would be a good sentence, right? That would be an independent clause. But because we put the since, now it's an incomplete thought. Same thing here. Brown went into the forest late at night. Without the after, that's a complete thought, right? But when we put the after on, now it's a dependent clause because it's not a complete thought, right? It can't stand on its own. Same thing with the last one. If we took out the as, the townspeople lived double lives, that could be its own sentence. We put the as in there, though, we put the subordinated conjunction in, now it's not a complete thought. So there's a bunch of words, right? So these are a bunch of subordinated conjunctions that help us to make dependent clauses, right? After, although, as, because, before, even if, even though, if, in order, and you can read the list, right? All of these words help to make clauses dependent. This is just a partial list of all the different subordinating conjunctions, right? Let's just take a look at a few of them, right? We went to the party. That's my independent clause. We went to the party, right? We went to, okay? And now, if I add any of these subordinating conjunctions, now we've got a dependent clause. We've got a clause that can't stand on its own. So after we went to the party. Well, what happened after we went to the party, right? Not a complete thought. Although we went to the party. Again, although we went to the party makes it a dependent clause, not a complete thought. As we went to the party. Because we went to the party. Before we went to the party. Even though we went to the party, if we went to the party, and so on, right? Whenever we go to the party, while we went to the party, whatever it is, all these subordinated conjunctions, like we said, make dependent clauses, okay? So that's a quick little rundown of our clauses, our building blocks of sentences, right? So we take these different clauses and we put them together in different ways to make bigger and more sophisticated sentences. But before we move on to our kinds of sentences, let's make sure we can identify what's an independent clause and what's a dependent clause. So let's clear the screen here. Let's scroll down a little bit. Okay? So let's take a look at these here. Are these independent or dependent? What do you think? Let's go through a couple of them together. Goodman Brown was nervous in the forest. What do you think? Goodman Brown was nervous in the forest. If you're still thinking about it, pause the video, give it a thought for a second. But this one, it's got a subject, it's got a verb, it expresses a complete thought, right? He was nervous in the forest. That's a complete thought. So what is it? This one's independent, right? All right, how about the next one? even though Goodman Brown was nervous in the forest. We've got a subject, we've got a verb, but does it express a complete thought? Can this be its own sentence? Again, pause the video if you want to think about it for a few seconds. But this one is dependent, right? We've got even though, which is our subordinating conjunction, right? This even though makes it not a complete thought. It can't be its own sentence. It cannot be its own sentence, so it's a dependent clause, right? How about this one, number 3? Goodman Brown saw his wife in the forest. Can that be its own sentence? Yep, of course it can, right? That's a complete thought. How about this one? Because Goodman Brown saw his wife in the forest. Again, pause the video if you want to think about it for a second. But this one is a dependent clause, right? It cannot be on its own, right? If I said, because Goodman saw his wife in the forest, you would wait for me to say more. Well, what happened because Goodman saw his wife in the forest, right? This one is not a complete thought. It needs more information to be a complete sentence. So it's a dependent clause. Last couple. Whenever Goodman Brown went to church. Complete thought? Or, so independent clause or dependent? Dependent, right? This one is not a complete thought. It can't stand on its own. So what happened whenever Goodman went to the church, right? This is not a complete thought. It can't be its own sentence. So this one is dependent. And the last one. Goodman Brown didn't trust the townspeople. Complete thought, right? Goodman Brown didn't trust the townspeople. Got a subject, got a verb. It expresses a complete thought. This can be its own sentence. Okay? So this one is independent. Okay? So that should give you a pretty good understanding of clauses. Independent and dependent. Again, these are important because it's going to be important for our understanding of different ACT questions, and they're important for us to be able to build longer, more sophisticated sentences. And so in the next few lessons, we'll be talking about different sentence types. But before we can talk about sentences, we've got to understand these dependent and independent clauses, right? Because these are the building blocks of sentences. This is what helps us build longer and better sentences. Okay? So if you understood what's going on in this video, go ahead to the lesson 1 quiz on independent and dependent clauses and go ahead and take that quiz. If you want to watch the video again, feel free to do that and then go take the quiz. Okay? Sound good? Also, if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to post those questions on Edline in the Plaza, and maybe your classmates will help you out. I can respond as well. Okay? All right. Good luck with that quiz. Lesson 1 quiz.